All right. Good morning and hello, my bio juniors. We are going to keep it going with Unit 5. So go ahead, get out that notebook or piece of paper or whatever you are using to take notes on evolution. And let me move my screen a little bit. Oh, this is like kind of off. Hold on one second. Um, Go ahead and take those notes. Or sorry, blech. Get your notes ready. There we go. Um, Set up your notes. Today we are continuing Unit 5. We're doing 5.2 natural selection today. And go ahead and pause this and just take a second to write down what is natural selection? What do you know about it? Like what kind of things do you think about when you hear the words natural selection? And then also go ahead and write down if you know any examples of natural selection. So pause it and do that for me. Okay, hopefully you paused the video and did what I asked. And we are going to go ahead and jump right in. So feel free to pop into office hours later this afternoon if you have any questions about um, natural selection or the content that we're learning today, or if you just have some questions about what we learned last class, whatever you need me for, feel free to pop into office hours. Okay, so let's jump in. Our guiding questions for today. The first one, why do members of the same species have such variation in their characteristics? And the second one, what natural mechanisms could produce different versions of the same species and ultimately different species? So why it matters in this class. Again, we're on topic 5 out of 6. We are almost there. And then why this matters in life. Natural selection is one of the main mechanisms that we point to when we're talking about evolution. So it's important to understand what it is and what it means. And then I thought this was kind of funny. Why are we stopping teens from eating Tide Pods when this is clearly natural selection at work? Please don't eat Tide Pods. That's just a joke. Okay. So let's jump into this. Natural selection. Anybody think about it? I mean, I don't have anyone to tell me, but do any of you remember maybe who came up with natural selection? Hopefully you said Charles Darwin. I'll get rid of my face so you can see Charles Darwin's face. That is Charles Darwin. He was the scientist who postulated or hypothesized this idea of natural selection and also the theory of evolution. So Charles Darwin described the theory of evolution in his work, The Origin of Species. And he wrote The Origin of Species while he was on basically observing and collecting data from the Galapagos Islands, which are off the coast of Ecuador. So he traveled to the Galapagos Islands and he concluded that the animals on the islands evolved differences after separating from a common ancestor from mainland South America. So he basically would look at the coast of Ecuador and then look at the Galapagos Islands and see similarities that made him think that they had a common ancestor, but that they had evolved over time to look different. Or to have different niches or to do different functions. You don't necessarily need to write this part. This is just a little bit of a background for you. This is where you want to start writing. So, what is natural selection? Darwin proposed that natural selection favors individuals that are best able to survive and reproduce. If you are an individual and you are able to survive, but you can't reproduce, then you're not going to be naturally selected for. You've got to be able to have offspring. So under certain conditions, this idea of the individuals that are best able to survive and reproduce, this can lead to change within a species or even lead to a whole new species under the right conditions. So this is what you guys often probably hear as survival of the fittest, but it's not just survival of the fittest, it's survival and reproduction of the fittest. So take a second to pause and write this if you need. Well, you should write this part. Okay, let's keep going. So, take a look at these two pictures here. So we have butterflies, hopefully is what you notice. And I want you to look at the difference between these two, what you could say models of evolution. So on this left-hand side, hopefully you notice that these two butterflies are gradually changing. They are slowly changing over time. This is one idea of natural selection. And then if you look at the other side on the right, you can see that these butterflies, it's kind of staying the same, staying the same, and there's this rapid change, staying the same, and then there's this rapid change. These are both models that we see in nature. They're just two different models of natural selection. So the first is called gradualism. This is when speciation, that word speciation, this just means a new species is diverging from the common ancestor. Gradualism is when that new species diverges gradually. The change is really gradual. It happens really slowly over a long period of time. That would be this example on the left. And then on the right is what we call punctuated equilibrium. Think of like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence. It happens really fast and really quickly. This is when speciation is going to happen rapidly between periods of little to no change. This might happen when there's a major shift in the environment really quickly. This might that's usually when this will happen, is there's some kind of major shift in the environment which causes natural selection to happen really rapidly. So take these two notes and then keep on going. Okay. So what is necessary for natural selection to work? What do we need in order to see natural selection happen? The first is there has to be variation in the species in order for natural selection to even happen. Because think about, if there is zero variation, if we all look exactly the same, if all of these dogs looked exactly the same, there's nothing to be selected for. There's nothing that could make one dog more likely to survive and reproduce than another. So you have to see different characteristics in the species in order to see one of those characteristics be selected for. The second thing that has to happen, in order for there to be variation, we have to get variation through these three things. Mutation in our genes, meiosis. Meiosis is that the combination of genes between your mom and your dad, and then when they split to create sex cells, and sexual reproduction or fertilization. So all three of those things that happen in our DNA are what causes variation between individuals in a species, because those lead to different alleles in each offspring. So if you think about, you and your siblings do not look exactly the same because your parents' cells had to go through meiosis, and every single sperm cell and every single egg cell had a different set of alleles because of that idea of crossing over that we learned a really long time ago. And then one of those random sperm cells and one of those random egg cells combine during sexual reproduction to create a new offspring with new alleles. So you're not going to look exactly like your sibling. So that is that variation that we're talking about. And you also could have a mutation in your DNA too that caused something to look different. Offspring will keep these genes and the same characteristics for the whole of their life, but some individuals will be better adapted and therefore will reproduce more successfully. All this last bullet point is saying is that, like, your genes are your genes. Your DNA isn't going to change throughout the course of your life. You are what you got. And if you are better adapted, then maybe you'll reproduce more successfully, meaning you'll have more offspring and you'll pass that gene on. So pause and take that note when you need, and then come on back. Okay, you don't really need to take notes here, but I think it's good to see. We obviously regularly see variation in human beings. You see, when you walk down the street, you see the fact that all of human beings look different. But it is important to realize that there is variation in other species too, even if you don't realize it. Not every zebra looks exactly the same. So here are just some examples of variation in different species. So for this example, we see the zebra. Their stripe widths are different. Their number of stripes are different. The way that their ears are placed are different. So the faces are different. So there's variation within one species. Here's another example of variation. We see some variation in size, from pretty big beetles to pretty small. We see variation in color. Here is peanuts, variation in size, shape, even the texture of the outside looks different for some of these peanuts. Here is some pretty seashells. We see variation in color, size, shape, width. This one is a lot wider than, say, this one up here. Shapes are different, patterns are different. Here are some pigs. We see variation in their, well, size, because we have a fully grown mama pig and some baby pigs, but all of their different colors, we see variation. And then here is an example of the peppered moth. This is something that you might have learned about in history class, but it's a great example of natural selection and punctuated equilibrium because it happened really quickly. So, in the UK, before the Industrial Revolution, this white peppered moth was the one that was being naturally selected for and was much more prevalent and much more common because the bark of the tree that this white moth would land on was white because it was its natural color because there was no pollutants in the air yet. Then the Industrial Revolution happened and we started having factories releasing a ton of pollutants into the air and a ton of ash, and that ash settled on the trees and caused the tree bark to turn a really dark color. And so the tree barks changed from white to black really quickly. And now all of a sudden these black moths were the ones being naturally selected for because their predators could now see the white moth on the dark polluted tree bark way easier than they could see the dark moth. So we saw that change in natural selection super quickly. And actually now that we've imposed some restrictions on pollutants and on the amount of ash going into the air, recent studies suggest that it is flipping back to where this white moth is more favored in the UK now than the dark moth, which is pretty cool. So that is just some natural selection in action. Okay, and this I think is our last slide, I think. But what is necessary for natural selection to work? So many species also, in order for natural selection to happen, they do this thing where they overproduce offspring. For example, we'll learn about the cane toads soon, and they overproduce offspring. But many species have an overproduction of offspring. Some advantages of overproduction. Some advantages are that species which have predators increase the chance of survival of their DNA when they overproduce offspring. So I always think of think of Finding Nemo when they had thousands of little Nemo babies. This is overproduction of offspring. When you have 100 babies, you increase the chance that 10 of those babies will survive, right? Because there's 100 of them. It also supports the survival of the fittest because it's likely that the 10 of those 100 babies that survive are going to be the strongest ones, which leads to a stronger gene pool. And it also increases the odds of spontaneous variation, which might lead to a better adapted individual. If you have 100 babies instead of 2, you're going to see more random combinations of the alleles and likely a stronger combination of alleles. But there are some risks to overproduction as well. It can threaten the entire population if the food supply is destroyed. So if for some reason all of the food is destroyed, then the entire population could potentially die because they don't have any food to eat. It also causes intra-specific competition between the offspring. So think of that prefix intra. So intra means within. So this basically is sibling rivalries. The brother and sister fish are going to fight against each other for food, which can be a risk because you're basically making it more difficult for your offspring to survive because they have to compete with each other. And last but not least, this is kind of like an invasive species. If one species becomes too numerous, this could threaten other species or it could threaten the entire ecosystem. So take a note if you need. Okay. So an example of this, sea turtles can lay anywhere from 70 to 190 eggs, and fish lay millions of eggs at one time. So both of these populations, both of these species use overproduction of offspring to drive natural selection. Okay, sweet. That was our last note. So here are your assignments for today, your independent practice. I want you to watch the Amoeba Sisters natural selection video that I linked on Google Classroom and then answer those questions on the Google form worksheet. It's the Amoeba Sisters worksheet, which is a Google form. Tried to make it easier for y'all so you don't have to worry about how to turn it in. You just turn in the Google form. And then once you feel really confident about everything that we learned today, I want you to go ahead and take that exit ticket on Google Classroom. And if you need help or you want to go over any of this material, make sure you log on to office hours this afternoon. I'll be online from about 2 to 3 p.m. So log on and ask me any questions that you have. And then there's my joke, natural selection at its finest. All right, awesome. I hope you guys have an awesome Monday. I will see you at office hours. Make today awesome, y'all.